I think what we're going to see tomorrow night is what Kamala Harris has been sharing with the public since she launched this campaign at the helm. And that is a vision for what kind of future we're going to have in this country. And what does that future look like? And that's particularly important when it comes to reproductive freedom, which has been the driving issue for voters, women voters in particular, since the Dobbs decision. And she has laid out for people a future in which we can restore these freedoms and rights that have been stripped away from us, in which people can not just get by, but can thrive. And that stands in stark contrast to what is being offered by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, which is a future in which we go backwards, a future that is governed by the principles of the Project 2025 agenda. So I think that's what we're going to see on stage tomorrow night, and that's what we have been hearing from her since she launched this campaign.
Well, Jessica, we've seen Donald Trump on stage with a female candidate before. Just ask Hillary Clinton how that went. And there have been a lot of questions about that, how that changes the dynamic in this cycle, of course, versus the first debate that we saw him in with Joe Biden. To what extent should Donald Trump's past interactions with Hillary Clinton in this case, knowing that Kamala Harris is reviewing debate footage right now as part of her prep, how does that impact or color the way that Kamala Harris will approach this conversation tomorrow night?
Well, I think the important thing when it comes to Donald Trump is to really be prepared for anything. We have to remember that Donald Trump has been a performer his entire life. And so
he also speaks differently to women than he does to men, doesn't he?
And he often does. He often does. But we don't know which Donald Trump is going to show up tomorrow night, right? We don't know what he's going to be like. I would expect that he has prepped very well for this. This is his seventh national presidential debate that he is engaging in. So he has a lot of practice at this. I would expect that we would see, and I think we have to plan to see kind of the performer of Donald Trump, though the person who shows up and uses all the tools in his toolbox, which for him, that's lies, that's distraction, that's manipulation. He's not tethered by the truth. Anything that he can use is to present a different portrait to the American people than what we know is the reality of what kind of president that he is going to be. So we have to be prepared for the Donald Trump that showed up in 2016, but we also have to be prepared for a Donald Trump who shows up and holds it together for 90 minutes. But what we know is that no matter which Donald Trump shows up, that's what's going to be really important. And what I know she's preparing for is to really lay out that choice that's in front of voters.
Well, of course, voters already are sharing with pollsters how they're thinking about this choice. The latest New York Times Siena poll that came out this weekend finds Trump ahead by 1 point nationally, though that is within the margin of error. But the issue breakdown is what I find incredibly interesting here, Jessica. Trump holds a 13 percentage point advantage on the issue of the economy. Vice President Harris holds a 15 percentage point advantage on the issue of abortion. Now, our listeners on Bloomberg Radio may not see it over your right shoulder, but you have a sign behind you that literally says, keep abortion legal. How should we be thinking about the way in which not just Harris, but other female candidates that you were trying to see elected should be using that issue to their advantage this cycle?
Absolutely. Well, I will tell you, we have done a lot of research, not just in this election cycle, but in past election cycles around voters, women voters in particular. And I can tell you that reproductive freedom, as it has been since the Dobbs decision, is going to be a determinative issue in this election. For women, young women in particular, this is a deal breaker issue for them. And you see it in those advantages. We have to remember that Kamala Harris is still introducing herself to a large section of the electorate. They may know of her and have seen her in her role as vice president, but they don't necessarily have the depth and breadth of knowledge. And so that's work that she's still doing. She's rolled out policy positions on economic policy that show that just like on the issue of reproductive freedom, she is going to be a person who stands up every day and fights for the people of this country. But when it comes to what is going to deliver the win in this election cycle is going to be won once again on reproductive freedom. And Kamala Harris has been very clear throughout her career and throughout this campaign that she is the candidate who is going to stand up for restoring these rights, for defending our freedoms, while Donald Trump is going to take us back. And we know that a vote for Donald Trump is a vote for a national abortion ban.
A couple of pretty fascinating statistics here, Jessica. 60% of donors to the Harris campaign in July were made up of women. Another one that was remarkable to read this morning. The number of women in the United States registered to vote is typically 7 to 10 million more than the number of men. That's according to the Center for American Women and Politics. Is the takeaway that women, one way or the other, will decide this election?
Women absolutely will decide this election. And I'm going to offer you one more stat because women, young women in particular, have the ability to be determinative in this election. We have seen in our research that between April and the end of July, a 56-point swing in motivation to vote from young women. That's women under 45. That's incredible. Those are not numbers that we see every day. But we also see that reflected whether it's in the long lines of people that are waiting in the summer heat to get into a Kamala Harris rally, or the spikes in voter registration that are being driven by young women and young women of color in particular. We see it in the record-breaking grassroots contributions. We see it in the volunteer shifts. So there is incredible enthusiasm and energy from women in this election. And we know that it's a diverse coalition of women who are going to deliver this victory for Kamala Harris and for women up and down the ballot. And they're going to do so on the issue of reproductive freedom.
Well, and so let's talk about other women down the ballot. Of course, there's a number of vulnerable incumbent Democratic senators. I could think of female ones, Tammy Baldwin, Jackie Rosen, for example. There's also women who are trying to unseat Republicans, including the challenger of Rick Scott in Florida. How are you realistically looking at the races and the way in which women could have a role in determining the ultimate balance of the Senate in particular? Like, for example, do you think that Florida race is actually winnable?
Well, I can tell you that Democratic pro-choice women running at all levels of the ballot are going to be the drivers of securing Democratic pro-choice majorities at all levels of the ballot. And we know that we need those majorities if we are going to fully restore our rights. So everywhere from the state legislative chambers in Arizona and Wisconsin and New Hampshire that we can flip in this election cycle, to the battle for control of the House of Representatives, to the Senate, as you named, with Jackie Rosen, Tammy Baldwin, Angela also Brooks in Maryland, a really important race, Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan, and Debbie Merkersell-Powell in Florida, and Gloria Johnson in Tennessee. Those races are in play because of the salience of the issue of reproductive freedom. In Florida in particular, as you mentioned, we have an opportunity, voters will have an opportunity to vote on the issue of reproductive freedom and restore those rights in state law. But they also have an opportunity to make sure that Debbie Merkersell-Powell goes to the Senate, that we don't have Rick Scott as Senate Majority Leader. And we know that in that race, like all of these other races, it comes down to who is going to stand up for these rights. And I think there's great opportunity in Florida and across the map, because we've seen that when we frame these races around the choices on reproductive freedom and abortion rights, Democrats win.